What's up everyone, welcome back to ARTV. My name is John and it's time for a review of the bane of my existence. The thorn in my the skillet in my pan. It's time for a review of Skillet's 10th studio album, the Christian rock, hard rock, crossover pop rock band, and their album Victorious. Collide, Comatose, Awake, Rise, Unleashed, and Victorious. That has been every album title since their 2003 release. And some of their earlier stuff, not bad by any means. Some of it I do definitely roll my eyes at, and I can understand that it's not for me, but I can appreciate that others maybe like the fact that Comatose maybe combined some symphonic elements, went a little bit harder, had some lyrical content that stood out and spoke to people, because I do like songs from that album, and even some from Awake. But Awake, a decade ago, is really what pushed them to new territory as a Christian act, as a band. And I think that they really started to water down their music, their production, their overall sound at that point. They had some lineup changes, and obviously we did get Jen Ledger in as a drummer, as their former drummer had retired from Skillet. And Jen is just fine. I even checked out some of her solo stuff. It's not bad. But in the context of Skillet, they seem to use her as the voice to go to have some sort of call and response, back and forth. And Skillet's lyrical content is about as deep as a skillet. I'm talking like 1 inch or maybe 2 at most. In the 2010s decade, Skillet have relied so heavily on the teenagers or else the Christian church demographic that listen to nothing of the secular kind, but also Skillet, because they're a little bit edgier, they don't necessarily say God in their music, they just say, oh, there's this force, or he is the one that is doing this. And I kind of hate how maybe intentionally or unintentionally vague everything feels once again on Victorious, because while maybe it's not quite as painful or as cringe-inducing overall as Unleashed, there's a plethora of problems going on here. The Christian rock bands seem hell-bent on keeping things the exact same almost every time around. Just like Unleashed, there are 12 songs. This one does feature less call and response moments with Jen and John Cooper, but still, it's an album that you can play from start to finish and just not be fazed by in any way. The moments that do stand out are normally glaringly bad, and it's frustrating because there are talented musicians within this band. And even John Cooper's voice, I've heard it be solid enough, something that I could enjoy and that I know others would too if they would just put it to good use in any kind of way. All I can say is get ready for another batch of songs that are going to come down the chute one right after the other. Sometimes we get one that's a little bit slower and it leans in to be more of like a Christian moment, like Anchor. And then get ready for some of the rising up songs like, oh, you guessed it, Rise Up, or Legendary, which I'll admit the guitars in the intro are just fine. They kind of have an electrifying, anthemic, crowd fist-pumping vibe to them, but then the lyrics come in and John comes in and it all sounds the same as always, and I just don't see how this gets anybody fired up. If you're listening to this for your workout playlist or whatever, fine, but you've got to know that there's better stuff out there. The guitars are pretty much sounding the exact same as always when it comes to modern era Skillet. If you're interested in some vague little riffs that sound like maybe they're going to build up into something, and the occasional drum clip, or maybe a little bit of a blast beat here or there that's like, oh, they tease something for just a split second, then it's like, nah, we're just going to cool out instead. It leans again on pop melodies, which is fine if they actually did anything with it, but instead they squander nearly everything away, losing me on almost all of the songs and just running the thing into the ground. Skillet in 2019 is very clearly for one specific crowd. It's for maybe teenagers or maybe the Christian church that are like, oh, I need to rise up against Satan, I guess, and Skillet is going to be the soundtrack to make me victorious. Lyrically, this album is an absolute nightmare to sift through. If you listen to You Ain't Ready more than 2 times, I would say you'd be ready to gouge your eyes out at how cringe-inducing that it actually is, or Legendary with that repetitive whoa, whoa, whoa that they just keep running into the ground, seemingly thinking it's a great idea. Oh, let's break out again on the title track, Victorious, and it sounds like the exact same shit. Terrify the Dark is one of the most lyrically ambiguous tunes about God that I've ever heard. I mean, at least on the last record we had something like Stars that felt like a standout, and this album overall, a huge detractor and negative that's going in its way once again, is that it doesn't have standout moments. I mean, the last record was at least memorable in the sense that it was so bad, and it did have like 2 songs that I felt were worth saving, but this album, minus probably the last track, maybe elements of Save Me where I do like the vocals and I think the guitar and drum pattern is nice enough. And then finally at the end of the album we get Back to Life where we get that awesome outro where the guitars, the drums, and everything really steps up. You can hear the bass in the mix for once instead of it just feeling programmed or forced. But outside of that, I just don't feel that this album is very human. It's very by the numbers, it's generic down to a T, the lyrics are asinine and inconsequential, and they're just repeating themselves. And if I keep going with this review, then that's what I'm gonna do too. Before I get to my closing thoughts, there are a couple of things that really got under my skin, like Finish Line. It had all of those really painful food allegories where they tried to set up metaphors for being hungry and leftovers aren't gonna be enough to get me through. I gotta make it to the finish line. I just want to facepalm over and over again. But the one thing that really blatantly stood out to me as being so bad is the bass or else racing synth line, however they programmed it on the track, Never Going Back. Tell me, does this sound familiar to you at all? Wait a minute, it couldn't be. Could they have just lifted that from a Muse song? Yep, that's Hysteria. For some out there, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but for others, you're going to hate me for this review. So it is what it is. I'm going to cap off my review of Victorious right there. This is a slight step up from Unleashed. It's not quite as cringy, but it's still downright awful overall. I do like a couple of songs, favorites and least favorites in the description. It's a 1.5 out of 5 for me. Be sure to drop a like on this video while you're here because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of panhead dislikes flooding in without even watching the full review. If you want to see my last Skillet review for some reason, then tap here for Unleashed, or tap here for another rock review for something that I would actually recommend. All of my social media accounts, including my Patreon page if you want to support the channel, can be found in the description, and I will see you soon for more right here on ARTV.